Good morning and welcome to the Metal Pack Pod, the industry's leading podcast for the global metal packaging industry. The Metal Pack Pod is brought to you by the Metal Packager, the number one digital resource for the global metal packaging market. With over 7,000 monthly users in over 150 countries globally, be sure to check us out on metalpackager.com. I'm your host Alex Fordham, and today we welcome back popular guest Mark Smyth. During this episode, Mark outlines why the industry has slowed during this past year, and he also previews the upcoming future of metal packaging and coatings to 2029 from Smithers, from which he is author. Mark is a packaging consultant with over 40 years' experience in packaging solutions. He has a wide range of experience in R&D, engineering, commercial and strategic planning roles, spanning metal, glass, plastic containers and flexible packaging businesses for beverage, food, personal care and industrial markets. But before we begin this episode, we must give special mention to our sponsors, PPG Packaging Coatings. We're proud to partner with you and thank you for supporting the Metal Pack Pod this past year. Their range of innovative and sustainable solutions enables its customers to protect and beautify the world. Now on to today's show. It gives me great pleasure to introduce a familiar face to our podcast. So Mark's been a little while since we've last spoken. So looking forward to catching up on the latest trends and developments within the metal packaging industry. So I think that's probably a great place to start. I mean, what have you been up to during the last few months since we've last spoken?
Well, I continue to do consulting and business intelligence, marketing and packaging intelligence, and I completed a commission for Smithers on the future of metal packaging and coatings to 2029. Which was a deep dive into all statistics worldwide across 16 countries, deep dive across 16 key countries, looking at trade statistics, statutory accounts, looking at the market every which way possible, and what is the likely progression going forward. So that's just been sent off to publishers. So that's a report that's out there from Smithers information. So you just go into Google and Smithers, and then you can have a look at it and decide whether that's something of interest or not. And so that was a big piece of work which is completed.
Absolutely, and I'll be quite curious to get a bit of a deep dive into some of the industry trends and what's on the lips of the industry at the moment. But I think it's probably be a nice opportunity to maybe address the slight elephant in the room in terms of I know visiting recent shows and speaking to our customers that the industry has obviously not necessarily stagnated, but all good things come to an end, don't they, in terms of the growth that we've seen during the past few years.
2023 was a year of polycrisis for everything, not just metal, but pretty much every packaging material. And we had a number of strange things happen with volume absolutely going away completely. So we see every quoted packaging company across all materials talked about volume decline, talked about inventory reduction, lack of promotion. We step back from that. There are a couple of things you can do to look at this. One is to look at cost, look at consumer inflation, look at that's consumer price index by region, by country, and then look at disposable income and wage inflation. And if you map that out, you'll see that wages were not keeping up with prices. And so we had an inflation period which was resulting in a squeeze. Then we have another phenomenon that came in, which was a surprise and difficult to understand, but quite clearly, if we think about the start of the process in terms of materials for packaging right the way through to the consumer, and think about inventory. Inventory usually is held by the packager in terms of percent of total inventory. But there are other elements such as imported fill goods, inventory held by the filler, inventory held by the retailer. actual stock in the stores. This all went away, and when you have changes in inventory, that can have a bullwhip effect back on the producer, and that's something called the Forrester bullwhip effect, which is from the 60s, identified by Procter and Gamble. We absolutely had that, not just in metal packaging, but in other forms of packaging, where you had items were actually sold out. So a mismanagement to some degree of inventory. Volumes went down, and then it's gradually come back. So the other side of this that we look at is retail price inflation, disposable income, net disposable income. We see a recovery. And if you don't believe that, then the other way of looking at this is stock movement in terms of volume and price, which you can deconstruct. So you can look at the brands and how they're performing, and look at the packaging companies, metal packaging companies, and how they are performing. And what we see is a recovery. And in all the calls from the metal packagers in the first quarter, we have an indication of recovery, and we can see that when we look at some of these metrics. We see that. So my view is that you'll see volumes coming back in the second half of this year, early part of next year. We're starting to see promotions. We're starting to see fewer items out of stock. And I'm not talking just about Europe, I'm talking about Europe and the Americas. So we're getting back into a recovery mode. And then if we look further out, the other area to look at is the packaging waste and packaging development, where we see population is increasing. Every single policymaker from Canada, US, Europe, Japan, China is forecasting an increase in packaging waste. Behind that is an increase in packaging, which is quite dramatic. So we're talking about metrics that run from 3 to 6% per annum through to 2040. These are very big numbers, because we have an industry that has got quite a significant base. So if you look at beverage can, that will be somewhere in excess of 400 billion. Food can, somewhere in excess of 100 billion. And aerosols, somewhere in excess of 18 billion. So if you put those growth factors together, it's coming back. And what we need to do is to manage the waste aspect, and to go to complete circularity, which metal has an extremely good position as compared to other materials. So it's possible that there could be some sort of tailwind, maybe a shift from other materials to metal, but it would be slight. So I see that we're actually returning to being in quite a good position, and further details are in the report from Smithers.
We interrupt this episode for a brief segment from our sponsors, PPG.
Packaging coatings from PPG draw on our company's 140-year history of innovation. We never stop improving our solutions to meet the evolving needs of can makers and the marketplace. That spirit of innovation results in technology like the cradle-to-cradle platinum-rated PPG Innovel Pro. PPG Innovel Pro is the latest enhancement to the world's #1 non-BPA beverage can coating. It still doesn't use any bisphenol ingredients, but experienced can makers report that it now sprays like an epoxy. Follow PPG Packaging Coatings on LinkedIn or visit packagingcoatings.com to learn more about why PPG is the coatings partner for can making excellence.
No, I appreciate that overview. And just personally, did you the downturn? Did that take you by surprise? Kind of how quickly this happened, or is this following kind of fairly cyclical kind of approach in terms of what comes up must come down. So is this, are you kind of comfortable with what's happened during the past couple of years in terms of this downturn?
The analysis, or the starting point of the analysis, was discovering some things personally. So I like Lef, my cans of Lef. Guess what? Can't buy them. Out of stock. Out of stock 4 weeks in a major hypermarket. Then the other big one, which was in the national press, I live in France, is no mustard. Now, who ever heard of a Frenchman or French woman making a sauce without French mustard? Really, there was no French mustard. The mustard you could buy was English mustard. Well, nobody knew what to do with that. That went on for about 4 months, 5 months. Absolutely nothing, zero. Ran out. So that, and then we had the debate about no wine bottles in France and in Portugal. Not just debate; it was actually discussed in Parliament. So that was run out for different reasons. So we had a number of things that occurred that there was no material. Well, why? Why have we? I've been around a long time. Never heard of this before. You know, we had the oil crisis way back. We had material shortages, but I've never seen key items running out completely, just simply not there. That is the first sin of retail, is to run out, and that really happened. So that led me to think about bullwhip effect and go deeper into that. And of course, there are lots of very simple things you can do around that, which are fairly logical, which is to look at date of order receipt and date of actual shipment and look at variance. And there's a whole mathematics around that, which are in most modern supply chain systems, but it didn't work. We were caught, a lot of people were caught out. And people were caught out because, quite simply, wages were not keeping up with inflation. So if you have a budget of $100 or €100 and that's not changing, then obviously something has got to give. Yeah. And so people would move to own brands. They might move to another brand. They might simply go and get the mustard that they could find. They might do something like that. Then they'll come back. And when you do that, and you've got thousands of SKUs as a packaging producer, that has a really dramatic effect. We all think that every SKU has, oh, well, that's steel, or that's aluminium, and it's the same material. Well, wrong. Even a small can maker will probably, at metal level, in terms of coil or sheet, have 50 to 100 SKUs. And anyone with any size will have at least 1,000 at coil level SKUs. So if you start flipping from one to the other and flipping back, unless you have an excellent transparency in your supply chain, you're not going to keep up. And that can have an impact. Whether that's the truth behind it, I think it was certainly an effect, and we hadn't seen that before. And we see commentary about improved supply chain systems. That's a very difficult subject because you're talking about having transparency from the retailer all the way back. So we can all understand that that's not so easy to do because people don't like giving out information about how stock is moving within their sector. Yeah. So these are things that, if we think about it, we can look at, and the metrics do show that wages are recovering. I'm talking about for the majority of the population, and we do see promotions and position at retail improving. So it's still got a while to go to really catch up, but it's coming back, and it has to come back because demand is increasing. So when we look at other metrics such as waste statistics, for which we have the weight, that is increasing. So there is no question that consumption is increasing. So and there's a demand there. So demand is not broken. It's going to return. Yeah. So that's how I see it.
No, I appreciate that overview. Very, very interesting. From one thing I just wanted to ask you was, I know for the short term sort of reduction in demand, I heard that it was from a brand owner perspective, they saw it as a once in a generation opportunity to increase prices and essentially get away with it. So do you think the brand owners were kind of to blame as well in terms of creating this sort of short-term reduction in demand? Because ultimately, if people are on a budget, as you were saying, they've got $100 to spend per week on groceries, and then they just turn around and say, well, everything ultimately has a price. So their regular 12-pack of beers or their Coca-Cola that they buy for the household, they just turn around and say, actually, everything has a price. So no, I'm gonna leave it alone. So do you think the brand owners basically saw an opportunity to increase prices exponentially, and this is kind of created this issue as well?
I think that most brands will have had no option but to increase prices. It wasn't just packaging; it was ingredients. We had surprising things happen, like the discovery that a lot of vegetable oil comes out of the Ukraine and no means to replace that, so creating a shortage. We had a shortage in freight, and we had the Suez Canal incident, which resulted in freight prices escalating. We had crazy situations where it was $20,000 to ship a 40-footer, whereas let's say $3,000 or $4,000 might be the peak. I'm talking about transcontinental shipping. So all of these things were there, and there were undoubtedly costs in front of the brand owners that they have no option really but to put that through. As regards to pricing, then through cloud computing, there are now some very, very smart commercial offers out there for commercial providers to check pricing. The cost of doing such studies is at a level now that is way, way lower than it was, say, 10 years ago. So it's quite easy to check pricing elasticity. You can quite easily do a consumer study with 200-300 people across regions of France, US, you name it, around the world, whatever way you want to do it, and have a result in terms of pricing elasticity and what it means to change the price in your brand and how that is going to impact demand. That can all be done very, very quickly. And if you look at the providers of information for conjoint marketing studies, which is about price and volume, incredibly powerful information. And of course, when you dig into it, you find that all the leading brands are doing this all the time, which is what one would expect. So the ability to try and exploit the situation means that you are going to get, if you're a brand with power behind you to do that, you are going to get reactivity from your competitors. So that in itself is going to be a constraint around your ability to drive through a sweeping price increase. Economics 101, pricing elasticity, these are all things that we understand. If we look at where we are now, none of that has changed. Pricing elasticity and pricing demand is a fundamental, and it is there. Obviously, when things get out of control, then we have an out of control situation, which is exactly what we saw last year.
Yeah, and you also throw into the mix things like climate issues as well. I know the price of olive oil has gone up exponentially as a result of sort of unusual weather patterns, etc. So you throw all of this into the mix, and you kind of had a perfect storm of what we've seen during the past couple of years. And yeah, and you're correct to say that it's not just the metal packaging sector that's been affected. So just want to move on to the latest metal packagings and coatings report up to 2029 that you've been involved with Smithers. And I know in the in some of the press releases that have been released that the growth rate in metal packaging sort of during the COVID kind of, I like to call it the COVID era, sort of 2019 to 2022, you saw sort of market growth rates of over 8% for the industry, and this is kind of has now fallen to projections of 3% growth rate for 2024 to 2029. So are we essentially seeing the growth revert back to type, and that the industry has always been seen as seeing steady growth, and is that what we're potentially seeing? And overall, you still bullish for the future health of the industry?
Yeah, I think you have to, when you're looking at things like COVID, you have to strip that out. So quite clearly, if the bars all close, nobody's going to drink beer. And we had constraints on the drinks side, but we also had constraints on the food side with people staying at home. And so when we look at food service, for instance, for food, that is the supply of food to schools and institutions, that went to zero because it was shut. So this is going to have a huge effect. So the only way to deal with that when you're looking at a forecast is to go back to old forecast techniques, which was always to look at what happened over the last 5 years or 10 years, and really understand what the changes were, because the changes in weather, changes in supply of food, and this type of thing, or inflation effects have occurred in the past, and then roll that forward. So where we have the pandemic in terms of preparing that, we have to put that to one side, because we have growth rates in some instances of up to 15% over the year. And in other cases, we have declines of 8%, 10%. So we have a complete mismatch, which overall for cans, as it happens, was an increase. So if we look at the total packaging market, then that is everything, plastic, board, absolutely everything. Then, in fact, packaging demand and value increased over the pandemic period. And in that increase, where metal had something like 12% share, the share of the increase was over 1/3 with metal packaging. In other words, metal packaging did better through the pandemic than other materials. But we have to put that to one side and come back the other side and go back to the period before, and then break down all the elements around growth in terms of where we are. So looking at beverage can, looking at food can, aerosol, paint can, in each market, we find pockets of growth for everything. So people tend to say that specialty can or general line, well, there's nothing happening there. Well, that is wrong, absolutely wrong. We can see pockets of growth in Latin America and in Asia that are quite significant. Not so much growth in Europe and the US. So the comment that people would pass would tend to be by people from Europe or America. But in every market, we can find pockets of growth, which is interesting, and also new techniques, new methods, new ways of providing the packaging solution. So what we see is a growth of around 3%, but there is a range there. It depends on that. When we talk about 3%, that's for the whole world. So clearly, if we go to somewhere like Brazil or Southeast Asia or even in parts of Europe, there are growth pockets in certain areas which can be seen. We can see that. So the geographic perimeter is quite important. Overall, we see a return to growth of around 3%, and that is measured on value, constant prices from 2022. That's the way we have to do it. So value is the one thing that is the easiest thing to measure, but we do also measure volume where it's available. So whatever way we look at it, we see a 3% growth is the number, and the specifics are in the report.
No, thank you for that, Mark. No, I appreciate that. And just in terms of the overall report, obviously, I don't want to give too much away for those who will be purchasing, but perhaps just a brief synopsis from your side about what else the report will delve into would be appreciated.
Okay, well, it's all, as far as we can, it is all events. First of all, it is volume and value by region worldwide. There's a deep dive in 16 countries in effect. We do cover Australasia, that means Australia and New Zealand, but we cover that as a region. In order to do that, to cover Australia and New Zealand and what is happening there. We cover all the main countries, so US, France, Germany, Italy, Spain. I won't go through the whole list, but all key countries worldwide for metal packaging. Then in addition to that, we look at events and developments. The biggest development is, if you look at waste, then every single policy maker, and by that I mean Europe, EU, US, Canada, Japan, China, every single policy maker sees alternative packaging in the form of plastic as a miss. No surprise there, you can see that yourself. And plastic is so big, it's not feasible to think about switching from plastic to other materials, you know, on a large scale. What is possible is at a relatively low scale to see switching towards better materials. So in terms of performance, if we look at actual recycling versus current target, you'll see that metal packaging is ahead and plastic packaging is off a long way. And then the other side of it is the economics. So what is the value of recycling to the converter? We go into that and lay out quite clearly the position of aluminium, steel, glass, paper, plastic in terms of a quadrant, and where we are currently, and what is, if we look specifically at the EU, where we have the PPWR eco-modulated cost basis and the impact assessment report, we can make a rough assessment as to what is the impact likely to be, because these tariffs that are laid out are going to increase for materials that are not performing to target. That's the whole principle. So if we look at that, we see a compliance cost factor coming in, which will be borne by the packaging converter. Inevitably, since that's an additional cost, then that's going to become a compliance cost, which will have to be paid. Same thing for climate change and move to alternative renewable energy. Inevitably, there's going to be a capital cost associated with that. So that these are two big factors that are going to be inflationary factors that need thinking about in terms of pricing effect going forward, because there's no doubt about it. In my mind, the move to renewable energy, if you think about producing steel or aluminium, there's going to be significant capital, and we've seen some of that reported already, although we don't see it as the entire industry. We need to prepare ourselves for what one might call compliance costs, or the ability to meet all of this, which metal packaging is in a very good position to do that. So that is covered in the report. At least the thought and the logic behind that is covered. So then it would be down to the reader to make their own assessment as to where they are in that dimension.
No, thanks for that overview, Mark. And that was led me nicely on to my next question. Really, was that this isn't just the report that's focusing on the facts and figures of global metal packaging sales and trends within the industry, but also deep dives into some of the compliance issues, and particularly with the pathway to neutrality for 2050 with regards to CO2 emissions and the UN Sustainability Development Goals. So it really is this is a really essential reading for those who need the information on not just metal packaging stats, but also about how the industry can become more compliant with regards to sustainability goals.
Yeah. So I think it does. It's intended. The intent is to provide an overview of factors that we're confronted with today. The volume and value is the packaging volume and value. Other reports I see have to be using some form of filled goods value in order to get to the values they claim, because they're simply not there. So we do break down steel disappearance and aluminium disappearance specific to packaging, because it's quite easy with numbers on a global scale to arrive at a very big number. And from what I can see, some reports don't do this, and so we get metrics that are confusing. So what I can say is, when we dig down into this and we look at the key players and their sales and deconstruct their accounts as best we can, there is a match. So we spend a lot of time on that to be sure that as far as we can, the metrics that are in the report reflect what you will see if you look at the key players' accounts and reports and presentations. So I think it's a pretty good guide. And then the other thing I would say is, not so many people seem to be aware of this, but IFRS has published IFRS S1, which means that from accounts preparation, all companies that say they're in IFRS will have to have a sustainability piece. Doesn't matter what size you are, everyone will have to do this. So if you're moving from GAAP to IFRS, that's actually quite an important point. So where do you go? Of course, you would go to your advisors and your consultants in preparing accounts and your auditors. But that's important to have that in mind, that this isn't just applicable to large companies. Sustainability and where we are on recycling and net zero is important, and it is important to be thinking about where a company is and where its roadmap is to achieving these targets.
Excellent. And just on from my side, just a final question before we finish this podcast, is in terms of the state of play for the industry. Are you still optimistic for the future health of the industry, despite the kind of the framework in the last couple of years, or do we have to approach the next few years with caution? Just your overriding. Sorry, not to put you on the spot, Mark, but just your overall take on where we are today.
I think there's a great story for metal packaging. You just look at how it performs, where it is. I think it's got a great story, and the fact is that when you put a product in a metal container, it has a longer service life than any other package. That's an advantage that we tend to take for granted. And then filling speeds typically much faster filling speeds than any other package. So I think all the elements are there for what we lay out in terms of growth to be a reality. And if anything, there is a potential tailwind behind the values given.
No, thanks very much for that. And just for those who are interested in purchasing the report, so please be sure to check out smithers.com. Follow the link to the future of metal packaging coatings to 2029, and this will be available shortly. And essential reading for those within the industry looking to dive into stats, trends, and also projections for the next few years. So, Mark, it's been a pleasure as always, and I look forward to catching up with you soon.
Thanks very much, Alex. Pleasure talking to you.